Hello, students. Here we go again in our semester-long quest to become logically literate during the worldwide pandemic. And in this class, I want to talk to you about necessary and sufficient conditions. Now, one thing I like about logic is how it helps me get clear on what exactly is being claimed in what circumstances, and how I can say things clearly so that I am understood. And the language and logic of necessary and sufficient conditions can help us do that. So let's begin to think about that together. Now remember that an if-then conditional is composed of two propositions, P and Q, related by the connective if-then, or the arrow. The first proposition, the one that follows the if, is called the antecedent of the conditional, and the second proposition, the one that follows the then, is called the consequent. Now, in a conditional, the antecedent is called the sufficient condition, and the consequent is called the necessary condition. To help you remember this, when you're translating, just think sufficient then necessary, S then N, S then N. If a mammal is alive, then oxygen is present, the sufficient condition and the necessary condition. Now, if we say that Q is a necessary condition for P, it means that it is impossible to have P without Q. In other words, the absence of Q guarantees the absence of P. So suppose on an exam, I asked you to translate this sentence, this one right here. Having four sides is a necessary condition for being a square. Well, first we do our dictionary, right? But what's necessary here? Well, what's necessary is having four sides. So that goes in the consequent. Remember our diagram again. Sufficient and necessary. So anytime you have a necessary condition, you're going to put it in the consequent. So if having four sides is a necessary condition for being a square, that gives us if S, then F. It's impossible to have a square without having four sides. To say that P is a sufficient condition for Q is to say that the presence of P guarantees the presence of Q. In other words, it's impossible to have P without Q. If P is present, then Q must be also. Look at that. I forgot to make that green. Let's do it now. There we go. Now it's all pretty for us, right? So suppose you come across this sentence. Being human is a sufficient condition for being a mammal. Well, first you make your dictionary. H, it's a human. M, it's a mammal. And then you think, well, what's the sufficient condition? Human. So it goes in the antecedent, and that's translated as if H, then M, right? All you need to know about an animal to determine it's a mammal is to know that it's human. So let's try to develop our intuitions and think about this a little more. Suppose I say if you give birth to a baby, then you're a mother. What I'm saying is that the antecedent, giving birth to a baby, is enough. It's all you need to make it true that you're a mother. So in general, we say that the antecedent of a conditional is a sufficient condition for its consequent. So giving birth to a baby is a sufficient condition for being a mother. And in symbolizing, the antecedent again is the sufficient condition, right? If you give birth, then you're a mother. Sufficient, then necessary. This can help us think about why modus ponens is a valid form. Remember, modus ponens has the form if P then Q, P therefore Q. The argument form is claiming that P is sufficient for Q to occur, and we do have P, therefore we must have Q as well. So if the lights are on in my house, then I have electrical power. And the lights are on, so it's sufficient for me to know that I do then have power. And any argument of this form would be valid. Now think some more with me about necessary conditions. If P then Q means that P is enough or sufficient for Q, but it also means that Q is required or necessary for P. So if you give birth to a baby, you must be a mother. Being a mother is required. That is, you can't have given birth to a baby but not be a mother. In this way, the consequent of the conditional is a necessary condition for its antecedent. If the antecedent is true, then the consequent must be true as well. being a mother is a necessary condition for giving birth to a baby. So in symbolizing, the consequent is the necessary condition. And so we have if B, then M. Now, this can help us think about why modus tollens is a valid form. Modus tollens says if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. This argument is claiming that P is sufficient for Q to occur, but we don't have Q, so we can't have P. If the lights are on in my house, then I have electrical power. I do not have electrical power, the lights are not on in my house. The language of this also helps us understand how the infamous forms we looked at before, denying the antecedent and affirming the consequent, don't work. Right? So remember, if the lights are on, then we have power. The lights are not on, we don't have power. Right? That has to form if P, then Q, not P, therefore not Q. Right? Now, denying the antecedent denies a sufficient condition, denies that the lights are on, but that's not adequate to also deny the consequent. We could have all our light bulbs broken, our wiring problems, we could still have the power on even though the lights aren't on. Then there's affirming the consequent. If the lights are on in my house, then I have electrical power. I have electrical power, so the lights are on. Now, the consequent is a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. Just because I have electrical power is not sufficient for the lights to be on. I may have them all turned off rather, or I may have wiring problems and so forth. So think about it. If you give birth to a baby, then you're a mother. Your giving birth is a sufficient condition for being a mother. So you're giving birth to a baby only if you're a mother. Birth only if mother. While your being a mother is a necessary condition for giving a birth. So you are a mother if you've given birth, which means if you've given birth, then you're a mother. B, therefore, him. Consider, if Maria is alive, then Maria is breathing. Maria's being alive is a sufficient condition for her breathing. So more generally, X is alive only if X is breathing, while Maria's breathing is a necessary condition for her being alive. So more generally, X is breathing if X is alive. If A, therefore B. Also remember, there are many different ways to say if P then Q. Assuming PQ, whenever PQ, given PQ, provided PQ, P only if Q, a necessary condition of P is Q. All of these are symbolized this way. And also remember, PF if Q becomes if Q then P. And if by itself, whatever follows it, is the antecedent. So we have to sort of flip them, right? And similarly, that could come out in English. We could find it as P when Q, P since Q, P in case Q, P so long as Q, a sufficient condition of P is Q, and they'd all be translated Q then P. So when you're faced with sentences, you need to translate, like on an exam or just in life when you want to understand them. Keep in mind again, sufficient than necessary, right? And so if we have statements like being red is a necessary condition for being scarlet, being a horse is a sufficient condition for being a mammal is a necessary condition for being a sister, being a female rather is a necessary condition for being a sister, being a father is a sufficient condition for being a male. We can work our way through it with this in mind. What's the necessary condition here? Being red, right? Red. So the necessary goes in the consequence. That would become, if it's scarlet, then it's red. Being a horse is a sufficient condition for being a mammal. What's sufficient? Being a horse. So if it's a horse, right, then it's a mammal. Being a female is a necessary condition for being a sister. So what's necessary here? Being a female, right? So if it's a sister, then it's a female, because that's what's necessary. Being a father is a sufficient condition for being a male. What's sufficient here is being a father, D for dad. So If a father, then it's a male. So, think about these things. There's also a section in the textbook for you to look at. Think, meditate, and mull over necessary and sufficient conditions, and you'll be well armed to cut through a lot of logical tangles you might find yourself facing in your everyday life or on the upcoming exam. I'll be coming at you real soon with more on translation. Thank you for your kind attention.